Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. Today we are going to have a step-by-step walkthrough on deploying our blog project backend service. Whether you're a newbie or a seasoned developer, this tutorial is sure to provide you with some valuable insights. In this tutorial, we'll be covering 7 major steps. These include identifying your deployment service, setting up your deployment service, making your code available on your source control, pulling your code to your server, running Docker to set up and start your code on the server, get and set up your domain, setting up your server block on Nginx. By understanding and following these steps, I assure you that deploying your backend service will feel like a breeze. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, please make sure you are subscribed to the channel if you haven't already, and if you enjoy the content by the end of the tutorial, please leave a like and share with your friends and community. Let's get started. The first step in deploying a backend project is to identify what service you would use based on your project's requirements. This could vary from server-side, client-side, or mix of both. Knowing your needs will help you choose the right service. However, our consideration for today is a backend deployment which falls under the server side. And based on this, we have options such as AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, Heroku, and so on. For this tutorial though, we will be using DigitalOcean, which has been my go-to for backend deployments since my projects are relatively small, and I'm not rich enough to handle what happens when you mistakenly create a C7 extra large server and you're in debt of $3,000 within a night. I'm sure my folks with AWS will probably know this much more. Since we've chosen the deployment service, in this case DigitalOcean, the next thing is to set things up. First, we create an account, which I believe is the easiest thing to do. Next, we'll create our server config, and we will be going with the smallest just to save some bucks. Just a word of caution, ensure to clear your deals on time to avoid losing your data. Once you access the DigitalOcean website, you are presented with this page and you can sign up or log in. In my case, I already have an account and I'll probably log in. However, if you want to sign up, you can click on either of this button or this one. Okay? So it should be quite easy. So once you are logged in, you are going to be presented with this dashboard, and the page we want to access is the droplets page. And you want to create a new droplet. So this is where you're going to specify the region, then the data center. I'm not very familiar with all these parts. I just tend to choose anyone closer to me or anyone closer to where my users would be. Then after you're done with that, you can choose your operating system. In this case, I'm going to use Ubuntu. Then we can choose the version, and we can always choose the latest. So most of our installation process is going to be similar across all versions. So the version should not be an issue. Then you choose your CPU size. Yeah, in our case, we are using basic because we want to go as low as possible. Then also we choose some of this option. And again, we want to go as little as possible. So we are getting this option based on the version selected by default. But in our case, I think we should even go lower. And based on that, we can get a configuration as low as $4 per month, which I believe is reasonable enough. Then finally, you want to set up how you get authenticated. So you can either set up an SSH key or you can use a password. So going through the SSH route can be a bit complex. So I would just advise us to use the password for now. So in the future, when you get accustomed to the workings of DigitalOcean, then you can explore the SSH part. Yeah, there are other options which I don't think we need for what we want to do. And also you can specify tags, which I don't think they are necessary as well, considering that you are working in a very small and minute operation. And with all those sets, you can create your droplets. So once you have your droplets up and running, you are going to have a page like this, and we want to access the droplets now. So to access the droplets, we can click on this menu, and we can launch the console from here. So this is a new feature within DigitalOcean, which makes accessing your droplet quite easy compared to having to SSH through your terminal, which we used to do before. So here we can launch the console, and you'll be presented with a terminal-based view, as you can see. And in here, you can perform other operations I'm going to show us. So the next operation we want to do is to install the package I've highlighted before. So we are going to be installing Docker, then Docker Compose, then Nginx. So I won't really bother about going through that. I already have all those things installed. So what I'll do instead is I'm going to share us with some article on how to do that. So the funny thing is the articles are actually from DigitalOcean, which kinds of match what we want. So this is an article on how to install Docker as well as Docker Compose on your Ubuntu version 20.04. And you can walk through the article to learn some other information you would need. Okay? Then also here is the article to install Nginx on the same version of Ubuntu. So again, I would recommend we walk through the article to get an idea of what these things are actually meant to do. So based on that, you get a broader knowledge rather than just the one I'm going to provide you. So by the way, I've provided links to this article in the description section, so don't bother about pausing the video and trying to read the links, okay? And with all that said, we are technically done with setting up our server. Now that we've set up our server, the next thing is to push your backend code to your desired source control. We have Jira, which I believe is too complex for my small brain. Then we have Bitbucket, which special organizations tend to use. And then GitHub, which we all approve as the best, just saying. Since we all choose GitHub, well, I think so. Let's quickly go over setting up our project to be pushed to GitHub. To make our code available within our source control, in this case GitHub, we need to download the code first. So if you remember, we've been running everything to use.io. However, now that we are satisfied with what we want to download the code and push to our source control. My recent update with use.io kinds of provide us with every configuration we need to be able to deploy this project. So now we have a Docker Compose file as well as a Docker file, which is all we need to actually deploy our project. So without any further talk, let's download the code. So we just have to access the project, then click on download projects. So this is going to run a string and download the code. So as you can see, here is our code. And if I unzip it, I get a folder. And I can just delete this. So I want to open this folder within VS Code. Alright, so here is the folder content, and now we have an env based on all the configurations we are making. So remember, we have the configuration for our file management, then we have the configuration for our database management. So every information we've provided has been used to create an env file, which is here. And also here is our Docker Compose config, and here is our Docker file. So we have everything set up for us. And also you can take a look at the README just to get an idea of what happens within this. Okay, so remember our aim here is to set things up and push to our source control. In this case, we are using GitHub. So to do that, we can just open up our terminal and we have GitHub, or rather Git init. And because of that, now it has turned everything to green. So it means it has initiated a source control for Git for our project. And the funny thing about our source control is that nearly all of them use this particular method to initiate your Git repository. So you probably have Git init when you're pushing for Jira, Git init when you're pushing for Bitbucket, and so on. So that's not really an issue. So another thing I want to remove is this. So this was set up initially before we configured our external database. So we can remove that now. Then also, we don't want to have the env within our source control, or rather, we don't have to have the env within what we are going to be pushing to our source control. So to ignore this, we can just come in here, create a new file, and call it .gitignore, like that. And here we can specify the files, the folder we want to ignore. And in our case, we just want to ignore the env file. And as you can see, it is now grayed out, which means it's not part of what GitHub is tracking or what Git is tracking. So once we are done with this, we want to add this. So git add. Yeah, we are done with that. We can also commit git commit -n project setup. But that's all we can do for now. We've not set up a remote repository to push to, and that's the next step. So now we are going to go into our GitHub account. If you don't have one, I believe we can easily create one, and you have this. So we want to go into the new and create a repository. So I'll select myself as the owner, and the repository name is going to be Blockgrade API, and it's going to be public because I want it to be public, and that's what I want to do for now. So once that's created, we're going to have this view. So the one we want to use in this case is the second version because we've done most of what is required from the first version, this part. So here we are going to copy this, come back to our code and paste it here. So we are adding git remote add origin your remote URL. Then we come back here. So in this case, they are changing the branch name from whatever it is to main. Yeah, we can do the same thing. Then finally, we can copy the last command, which is this. And this is going to push our code to the version control, or rather the source control. So if we refresh our page, now we have our code here, okay? So here we are done with the third step, pushing our code to the source control. With our code available on GitHub, it's time to pull that code to our server. Watch closely. So let's pull in our code from our source control into our server. So if you remember, this is the terminal for our server. If you don't know how to get here, if you go back to your DigitalOcean page and access your droplet, you are going to view this page. And if you click on access and click launch droplet console, then you are going to be presented with this. So let's zoom back up. Now we're good. So back within our source control, in this case GitHub, you are going to click on this. And with this, we can clone our code. So as you can see, it's a clone and we have 3 methods to use. So we can use HTTPS, SSH, and so on. Our focus is just going to be the HTTPS. And we can just click to copy the link. So when you come back to your terminal, you can type in the following. Then the link you just copied. So when you do this and you click enter, it's going to go through the process of cloning. However, if you are doing this for the first time, it's going to require you to authenticate yourself. And it's going to require your username and password. So the password in this case is not your password when logging into GitHub. However, it's going to be your personal access token. And if you are worried about how to get that, it's quite easy. So you come back to your profile, click on settings, then scroll down to developer settings, and you click on your personal access tokens. You click on tokens, and you click generate new token. So it's going to bring a collection of checkboxes you have to check based on what you want to allow. And I think that should be self-explanatory. And once you generate that token, it's going to be a token you would use across board. So that's the token you're going to provide as your password when cloning here. So I'll click enter, and this is going to pull in my code. And to confirm that this is available, I can say ns, and I'm going to see all the repo available within the server. And in this case, our dealing is with the Blockgrade API. So here I can cd into Blockgrade API and do ls once more, and we get the content within here. So if you remember, we kind of removed our env the last time, okay? So this time around, we want to create that env on our server. The whole point of trying to remove the env is so as to not expose secret variables to your source control. So remember, our source control is public, which means anybody can come into there and see what we have. So we don't want to have our secret content exposed there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the content within my env. I'll do that. I'll come back here and I'm going to have nano. So remember within the Blockbreak API, the new repo we just posted in, and I'm going to have .env. So this is going to create the file as well as allow you to edit it immediately. And by the way, Nano is available on your Ubuntu server by default, so you're going to have this by default. So once we click, we can paste what we've copied. And we can save it by having Ctrl X, then Shift Y to save. I'll click Enter, and that saves it. So just to confirm that this is now available, we can type in ls once again, and we would see that it's not showing the env, and that's because the env is an hidden file. So to actually see it, we can have ns-al, then we get to see everything available, and yeah, as you can see, we have the env file now. So we are done with pulling our code from the source control into our server now. Now we've come to a crucial part, running Docker. Docker will set up and start our code on the server. Let's see how it's done. So running the server using our code generated with gis.io is even much more easier. So instead of typing in docker compose build to build, then typing in docker compose up to run, we can just use the start server script to execute everything. And if we come back to the README file and we come down to start server, you can see how that goes through. However, one thing we have to do is to make sure that the start server script file is executable. And to achieve that, we can just use this command. So I'll copy this, come back to our terminal, our server terminal, and paste this here. So this is going to make the script executable, and now we can add /start server script, and it's going to execute things and run things. So let's wait for it. All right, so it seems that we have an issue with our connection, and that's because I already have a service running on the port I specified here. So for those of us that are probably creating a new server, we won't have this issue. But in my case, I want to adjust this. And all I can do is just come back here, come back to my Docker Compose file. I was provided this by default, but nonetheless, I can update this. So I'll just update this to 8002. So that means I have to update this to 8002 as well. And I believe that should work. So with our changes, we can just push that to our source control. All right, so our changes are pushed. And coming back to our server, we can just pull in what we have. That's done. Now we can execute our start server script again. So now we can see that it created our service and it's running now. So to confirm that it's actually running, we can have docker-compose, then ps. And as you can see, we can see what port it's running on. And with that, we can conclude that our server is up and running. Great, our project is running, but it's only accessible from within the server, which is not ideal. We need a domain name to map to our server for external access. Let's go over how we can obtain and set up a domain. So getting a domain is quite easy, and all you need to do is just search by domain name, or if you have a site where you get a domain name already, you can just access that site and you get a domain name. So when you search by a domain name, you get options of site that allows you to buy a domain name, and you have surplus. However, I tend to make use of Namecheap. And yeah, I've gotten a domain name. Great. This is my website. And I'm actually creating a blog website for this website. Okay. So once you have your domain name, which is quite straightforward, and you can access the dashboard like this, you have this page. So most domain provider allows you to also manage your DNS on their platform. However, I tend to use an external system to manage my DNS, and that's where Cloudflare comes in, okay? So to make use of Cloudflare, all you have to do is to set up a custom DNS. By default, this is going to be Namecheap basic DNS, and you are going to have your default name servers here. But to allow Cloudflare take over, you can come to Cloudflare, register as usual, log in, then add a site. So when you click add a site, it's going to provide name servers for you. which you are going to add to your domain here, as you can see. So this is the name servers provided from Cloudflare, and I've added it here, and I've made the necessary verification. Now it's working. So I can access my site here, then go to the DNS section and manage my DNS. So this is where we are going to have all that, okay? So now that we have our domain set up, we can move on to the next step. Our final step is setting up our server block on Nginx. This is what allows public access to our projects, even though we have the domain set up. This is actually where the real mapping happens. Alright guys, let's set up our server block. So yeah, back within our terminal, we can once again confirm if our service is running by having docker-compose, then ps. And yeah, just as a confirmation, our server is running on port 8002. So with that said, the prerequisite for being able to set up our server block is installing Nginx. And one way to confirm that you have Nginx on your system is by going to etc Nginx. So if you have this part, then it means Nginx has been installed on your system. Another way to confirm is by typing Nginx, and you actually get the Nginx itself. And to confirm if every setup you have currently for Nginx is correct, you can have Nginx-T, and it's going to run through all your configuration and confirm that they are working. And as you can see, this didn't return an error, which means Nginx is working. Cool. So now we want to cd into etc sites enabled, or rather Nginx, then sites enabled. Yeah, that's where we want to go to. And if we type in ls, we will see the list of service we have up and running already. So now we want to create a new service, and we can easily use Nano to do that. So I'll just call this block grid. You can call it any name you want. So the way this works is that every configuration you have within this site enabled will be run through and used, okay? So whatever name you give it is going to read through it and understand it. So now that we are editing the block grids, we can define our server block here. And the structure for a server block is quite straightforward. All you have to do is define or type in server. Then it's going, everything you want to have is going to be within this block. Okay? So now we're going to listen to this server on a server name. The server name we want to use in this case is going to be blog API. And the domain name, like I mentioned recently, is going to be adefemigrates. So adefemigrates.com. Always ensure you close your line with a semicolon. Then you also want to specify what port you want to listen on. So I want this to run using SSL. So as a result of that, I'm going to listen on a 440 report. So 440 SSL. Okay, so that's the port I'm going to listen to. Then finally, I can specify what resources I want to return. So by default, if I am able to access this server using this domain name or that subdomain, then using the SSL port, then the resource I want to return is going to be the default location. And here we want to just return the resources running on our local server on port 8002. And we can achieve this using something called proxy pass. Like that. Then we specify the location, and in this case it's going to be HTTP localhost, then 8002. Again, you close this up. And finally, we can close this block. Then finally, we can close the server block. Okay. So we are done with the server block, and that's all we need to do. We can close this by having Ctrl X, then Shift Y, then Enter. And now we have that. So now we've written a new configuration and things can go wrong. So a way to confirm if your configuration is working well is to just type in Nginx, then -t. So it's going to run through the configurations and verify if your syntax is correct. And in this case, we have a successful message, which means what we've written is correct. So next, to make sure Nginx absorbs this new configuration into itself, we can run service Nginx reload. So this is just going to reload the Nginx service, and our new configuration should be incorporated. All right, so we set the server block. However, we don't have a way to map to the server block. And like I've said before, this is where the real mapping is happening. So to really have that mapping, we can come back to our Cloudflare, and here we can add a new record. So it's going to be an A record. Then we want to specify that subdomain we defined here. So we're going to have blog API, take note of that. And we are going to use the IP address of this server. And since we are using the same thing here already, I can just copy this and paste here and save. So by default, Cloudflare will try to give this service an SSL certificate. And that's what we have here. So if we come here, you can see that the configuration is to ensure that the service flow is always encrypted. So if we try to access our service now, blog API .adifemigrade.com, we get our service, and it can verify here that it's a secure connection. So HTTPS exists already. And we can access here the blog part. It takes us here. However, one thing you'll notice with this part is that it's referencing the internal local server, which is the localhost 8002. So if we click on this, then we get an issue. So to fix this, we can come back into our server block. Again, let's edit it, nano blog bit. And we can come back to our location. So one thing we want to set is to set an header. So here we're going to have proxy set header, and we want to specify the host as the header we are setting, and we want to specify the domain, in this case blog api.adifemigrate, as the host header. So by default it's the localhost server. However, we want to change that to the domain itself. And yeah, that is what we are going to use, and that is what Django would read for to be able to generate those URL. So now with that done, we can save once again. Okay, again, we are going to test if the process was written well. Yeah, the syntax is okay. Then let's reload it. Okay, now we've reloaded. We can come back here, refresh it. I will find out now that we have the domain showing here. And if we click on this, we get our list. And because we are operating on a different database, everything still remains the same. So on this note, we are done with mapping our server with our domain, and we can actually use the backend API. However, there are some cases where probably maybe you are not using Cloudflare and you want to still get a certificate so that you can use HTTPS. And that's where Let's Encrypt come in. So with this article, you can actually get a Let's Encrypt SSL certificate for your domain, as you can see. So if you just follow it through, you do that. So you have to install this on your server. Once you are done installing, you can actually run this to get your certificate. So let's try it out. So I'll copy this, come back to my server, and paste this here. So I just have to change this to my domain. So blog API.adifemigrate. All right, so after making the requests, it successfully received the certificate, and the certificate is stored within here. So we have two information. We have the certificate itself, and we have the key. Okay, and to actually use them, we can just copy this. Then we can have nano blog rate, so we can edit our service again. Then we can come somewhere here. It can actually be anywhere, and type in SSL_certificates. And we are going to specify the path we just copied. So ensure you are closing this up. Then the second one is going to be SSL_certificate_key. Then we are going to change this from full chain to private key. So priv key. Okay, so that's all we need to set to actually ensure that this server block always stays secured. So even though we are not using Cloudflare and we try to access this server block, then it has the certificate and it's going to be secure. So again, we can exit, we can save this. Then just to confirm that everything is working, we can have Nginx -t. So it looks like we have an issue, and I think we get the whole idea now. So we're able to use the Nginx -t to confirm that our configuration is okay. So that when we go on testing our code and we find out that it's not working like the way we want. So now let's fix this. So I think this just has to do with adding a semicolon to the end of our configuration. Okay, so that's all we need to do. Let's save it once again. All right, so let's test it again. Now everything is successful. Nginx, or rather service, Nginx reload. So that's okay as well. So once again, let's just test our server. Our API is working and everything seems to be working all right. Congratulations, everyone. You've now successfully deployed a backend project. If you made it to this point, give yourself a pat on the back. Thanks for joining us in today's tutorial. If you found it helpful or enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more content, and don't forget to share it with your friends and community. If you have any questions or if there is something you would like to share about your experience, don't hesitate to drop a comment below. See you in the next video. Stay awesome.